It's such an honor to be here, and I'm very joyful. And I wanted to, I'm also excited to just introduce in general Internal Family System, IFS for short. It was a life-changing process for me, and I'm very happy to share it in an Orthodox faith context. In my practice, I've been trained at University of Rochester in New York, trained psychodynamically, cognitive therapy, humanistic, all of it was wonderful, and I loved it. But at some point, something was missing. The integrating the spiritual part and the whole person was missing in all my training, and I didn't even know it. Little did I know, I did burn out about 10 years ago, maybe 12. And I did, after working in a VA hospital, I work also in a partial program, I have private practice, but there was something about missing the whole person that it was, for me, it felt maybe I'm in the wrong profession. And I did have a joy of teaching, so I switched to teaching. So I taught high school for about 8 years, and it was a wonderful experience. In a small school, I got to teach everything and just engage with middle schoolers and high schoolers was really fun. But then I came across psychosynthesis, which in Italy it's probably one of the first attempts to bring also spirituality and the unity inside. And also through my personal healing process, as I'm sure everyone else at some point, I hit a rough patch in my life, and I stumbled upon Internal Family System. And what was so interesting about it, all of a sudden it opened up my eyes. I'm like, oh my goodness, why did I not learn this in my training prior to this? And I went to formal training. I became an IFS therapist certified, and I now participate in trainings as a program assistant, and I just love the process. And what I found amazing is that there's such a cultural, a psychological framework that overlaps beautifully with our Orthodox faith. And it's so much flexibility in it, but the core is really beautiful. It has this idea that in the center, we have a center of wisdom and renewal. They call it true self, mind you. But in my mind, that's the image of God. If the image of God is in all of us, here it is. And they really think of it as mysterious. And there's a lot of unknowing, and you have to let go of your thoughts and your feelings and all of it in a way to get to know them, and at the same time to relate in a different way. And that's the holy ground. And it's just such a beautiful experience that I'm here very excited to present it, especially as in the process of healing the healer. Having gone, as I said earlier, through my own burnout, I appreciate, and it came really insidious, and I came up with the wrong conclusion that I'm in the wrong field. And that really made me think about there must be other ways that we can have an open discussion about it and support each other in our professions as healers, not just therapists and doctors, but priests and confessors and nurses, social workers, teachers in all disciplines, especially in our Orthodox faith, so we can keep on giving. How can we keep on giving? By taking care of ourselves. Of course, it does not help that in our culture there's so much emphasis on taking care of myself to a point of indulgence. And it makes sense that we would want to refrain from that. But between indulgence completely versus not taking care of our inner self, there's a lot in the middle that we can do, and we can help ourselves. Can everyone hear okay? So, yes. And it's also very hot in here, right? It's like Houston. Anyone from Houston? No. Okay, I used to live there for a few years. It's familiar. So let me introduce a little bit. I have a couple of quotes sprinkled around, and I just want to frame my workshops. I have 2 workshops. The first one is more theoretical, and the second one is practical. So we're going to do some exercises together to kind of flesh this out. So feel free to stay if you like for the second one. But I really love this quote. We should try to live in such a way that if the Gospels were lost, they could be rewritten by just looking at us. Isn't this amazing? Well, what does this mean? right? That's the story and the mystery of our lives. But in the helping vocation, it's something very unique. I mean, there's so many gifts of giving. We can make a positive impact in human life. There's profound rewards, psychic income. It gives deep meaning to our lives. There's a deep and profound growth from intellectual, emotional, spiritual. And there's a deep connection to the entire humanity and God in such a beautiful way. It's very mystical. And what happens, though, that at some point, and I'm just going to pause for a second. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, what I would like to share with you is from the research on burnout. There's such a the professionals describe it as a cycle of caring. In this helping professional, somehow we need to regenerate. And in this cycle of caring, the first two steps were many times, because we love to connect with others and we love to help, the first two steps are related to that, helping others. The empathic attachment, we're good at it. You know, we get connected with people right away, we engage with them. The active involvement has to do with whatever our profession or vocation is. You know, if we're a therapist or a nurse or a social worker or a priest, that's going to be whatever we're doing, and we go to school for that. But then what's interesting, that research is showing we need a separation phase. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, initially, that seemed odd, and probably that's why I got the problem in the first place. When I don't know if you've been on an airplane, right, when they talk about the oxygen masks. And when I had my babies years back, he says, put the mask first and then give it to your child or whoever's next to you. And I'm thinking, no way, I love my child. I want to put the oxygen mask on my child first. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. A dead mother is a dead child. It doesn't make any sense. I really have to put it on me first. So this separation phase and regeneration phase, they're really essential to reconnect, to make sure we have that oxygen mask. And I used to think of, oh, I'll do it in the weekend. Oh, I'll do it in vacation. Well, what happens until then? We build up something. And it's very important I started thinking of the cycle of caring throughout the day. We're not talking a cycle of caring just, so let's say I have a client. So I'm attaching, I'm empathically attaching. I do the therapy for a year or two, whatever, 2 months. And then there's a separation, the termination, and I come back. Well, what happens through the day when I have to see 10 people, right? Can I do that, those small cycles after each interaction? It opened my eyes to that there must be something in it. So the first two, as I mentioned earlier, it's through this lens I'm thinking that's the caring for others, and then this then is switching to caring for self. But again, what is this caring for self? And this is what I think, from an Orthodox perspective, I really appreciate that as caring for self as if this is Christ. If I'm indeed inhabiting temple of Christ, if my body, my feelings, everything is created by Christ, I need to also take care of his temple this way. Because too much caring, sometimes we circumvent that, and this is what happened to me. We move directly from empathic attachment to active involvement and then quickly right back. And we go to do this fast because we want to care. And guess what? There's an infinite need of caring. It's infinite. So we better be prepared and have this way of really sustaining ourselves really quickly. So when we skip the steps of regeneration and renewal, we go into what's called professionals call the treadmill effect. So we go into this and we go. Before we know it, though, we're going to start using distractions to relax. And before we know it, there's a hemorrhaging of the caring self. And this could happen really quickly, or it could happen like for me in 10 years, and it happened so slowly I was not even aware of it. So in this process, there's a lot of terms that maybe you already came across. Obviously, it can happen because of ambiguous endings, because professional uncertainty. There's a term of burnout, meaning just depletion and feeling really hopeless, and that's what I had. And again, it isn't that sad when wonderful, caring professionals come up to the conclusion, I must be in the wrong field just because I don't feel an interest anymore, right? And it could be because of burnout. So I think it's really an important message to hold with us. It can bring compassion fatigue, also vicarious trauma, just hearing stories after stories after stories. It's really intense. I teach a course here on self-care for helping professionals, and one of the things that we came to realize is that when people come to us, they come with problems. They don't come with their happy thoughts, right? If you're a nurse, a social worker, a doctor, a priest, people don't come with you when they're, let me tell you, I have this amazing life, and they won't. They'll come with negative feelings and negative affect and problems day in and day in and day out. So because of it, at some point, especially hearing traumas, we can also get traumatized ourselves or trigger things that are in us. And was very interesting, the discussion yesterday and the day before about full compassion and full ability to listen. Well, we can do that if there's space internally. But if we are triggered and all of a sudden we identify too much with what's happening, then it's not going to make space for that. We're going to be too preoccupied. So really taking care of ourselves that way in a deeper way. And I'm going to talk about the internal family system as a way to think internally about ourselves and pointing out maybe to ways to heal ourselves. So the framework for internal family system, this was developed by Dick Schwartz and about 30 years ago. And right now it became evidence-based therapy in America. We have to have the research behind it, and it has the research behind it now. But what was interesting was an intuitive model. The person didn't sit and say, let me find a framework. He actually stumbled upon it. He was a family therapist and all of a sudden kept hearing people, well, part of me thinks of this. Part of me thinks of that. Well, wait a minute. Maybe there's something of like a family internally. And I'm sure you had this experience at some points, sometimes a happy experience, sometimes horrifying experience. Oh my goodness, I sound like my mom, don't I? Or my dad, right? We all have those moments that we might not want it, but we hear the voice and we hope it's, sometimes they're really helpful voices or experience that we have. Sometimes they're not. Depends, right? Depends. We don't choose our upbringing. But the reality is that what's interesting, anyone trained in family therapy? Okay. So what's interesting in family therapy, everyone has a role. And when you see, let's say, a child could be sick, it's not just the child. You can treat the sickness of the child, but it can come right back if there's a family dynamic that keeps that child stuck in the role. Because, maybe it puts away the focus not on the parents' disagreement, but all of a sudden, it's the child, let's take care of him. So this idea that internally, the different reactions that we have roles and have jobs, and sometimes they get stuck in roles that they want to be, it was a very revolutionary idea. So obviously, when I think of multiplicity, I'm thinking, wait a minute, we need to be one with God. And then I realized, yes, we do have a deep desire for inner coherence and unity, being one with God. And in our faith, it's process of theosis. And I think it's just a beautiful way to realize that we're not there yet. That's why we are saved. We're not saved. We're saved through our life, through our process of knowing and living a life in the church and living a life with Christ. It's a process. Reality is that internally, yes, we all fragmented, and I think science nowadays helps us with that, yes, we do have different states of consciousness, different feelings, different thoughts, beliefs, aspects of ourselves. In this particular framework, they use the word parts, and I would not get too caught up in this term. Many of my clients do not like the word parts, and I don't use it. I just say a side of you, aspects of yourself, states of consciousness, feelings. I just stay with whatever it is, because sometimes parts, it looks a little, what do you mean? I have a little person inside doing this. It sometimes could be quite weird. But if we think about it, we do have different states of consciousness, right? Think about just being angry, for example. all of a sudden we might have different feelings. We might have tunnel vision. Our blood pressure goes up. We might turn red or whatever, right? Or we say things afterwards. We're like, oh my goodness, why did I say that for, right? And then it passes. And then we might get another state when we're anxious. And again, our physiology changes, our feelings and thoughts are changing. And then we may be really peaceful and sometimes really joyful and all of that. So we have shifts like that. And of course, we're aware of them. But sometimes they get really stuck, right? Have you ever had an experience where you had you felt really angry and it didn't leave you for a while, right? Anyone? I'm sure it didn't happen to me. It happened to me a lot of times. So because of it, this is what in this framework they call it part. So just to frame that. But at the core in this model, we have a true self. Now, I would say, and Christians would say, this is the image of God. So the true self is separate from what psychology has used as self or ego. It's nothing to do with actually us. It's more to do with God. There's a mystery inside. In depth psychology, that'll be the unconscious. There's something that we're not aware that's really mysterious, and there's an infinite goodness and infinite love and infinite compassion that we don't always have access to. So the idea of synergy, I think it's so beautiful in Orthodoxy because, yes, there is God and me working in a mysterious way. I have no idea how. Father Eugene Pentuik was, in his Old Testament course, is talking about we don't even want to separate how much is God and how much is me, because how do we even know that? It's a mystery. It's something that's happening that we just have to hold that in reverence. And Christian faith provides a lot of guideposts for us how to bring that unity. And I argue that psychology can also bring its fair share. I would say in my own way, I was very skeptical of the various psychological framework, just because, especially in the psychoanalytic training, you have to, believing in God and whatnot was considered a weakness or whatever, oral fixation. Not everyone, but in some circles. And I said, you know what, I'm going to choose Christ, and I want to filter any psychological framework through my faith. And it has to fit, otherwise it's just a human invention. Unless it resonates with Christ and with God, then we have to take that. The image that I have is this. If the circles are the parts, it's like the verse in the Bible. No, when we have veil covering God, and then what happens when we're connecting with God? Veils are removed, and then we can connect much closer to Him. So it's been my experience in working with people individually and in groups that there is a way that we can really connect with our parts so they can relax and they can really know Christ. Not just me on one center, but also the various parts. And we all have a major state of consciousness. I call it the iOS. And I don't know about you, but my mode of operation internally, I realized a while ago, oh my goodness, it's like iOS 4. And what number are we now in the iPhones? I don't know, is it 9? I was really outdated. I was still operating, almost like I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, like, oh, I have to update myself in a way. But when we do those updates, the system relaxes and we have access to our to Christ. And I really love it. I'm going to connect this. Father Anthony, my priest at St. Mary's, made a really wonderful sermon with a connection with the kingdom of God is within you. And I will bring that a little later. But just think about if it is indeed within us. So we can read the Bible even and apply it internally. There's a microcosmos that it's so much paralleling what's happening in the outer world. Now, just a few words about the true self, the image of God. So in this model, again, I'm introducing you to the model, and at the same time, I'm bringing our faith in it. The center, they call it the image, true self. In some other tradition, the spacious heart. But in our tradition, it would be the image of God. It would be Christ. And Dick Schwartz likes letters to kind of match. So he has 8 qualities of the self. They all start with C. It's easy to remember. Okay, I think that's a little stretch, but there's some truth to it. And I added a few, as you can see. All the letters without C, they're mine. Connectedness, yes, compassion, creativity, clarity, courage, curiosity, and all of this more from God's perspective, not my human curiosity. Oh, let me know, what are you doing? It's more like an interest. Think of Jesus, right? When he met the Samaritan women or the adulterous woman, he said, what do you need? What do you want? He was always curious that way. He never imposed, oh, let me tell you what you need to do. I'm Jesus and I can tell you, you need this, this, this. No, he was very curious and really listened to what was needed. And he made a distinction between the wish and the need, and we can talk more about that. But there's also peace and joy and love, and I would say all those are the fruits of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. And we can go back to the self-control, because there's a gentle way to do that, and there's a really authoritarian way to do that internally, and we can talk about that. And I think I love this. I was at a conference and they asked, if you'd pick one verse in the Bible reflecting your work, or that really stands out for you, and I said, oh, this one. You should love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like this. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Wow. There is no other commandment greater than these. What does it mean to love yourself without being egotistical and without falling into self-indulgence? That's the key question. What does it mean to love yourself? I would say caring, when I mentioned earlier, for our body, mind, and emotion and spirit as the temple of God. There's a beautiful morning prayer in our prayer books. Thank you, God, for entering in your temple. And I'm thinking, wow, I just woke up and I'm entering his temple. I'm entering his body. There's something very beautiful about that we can really use in our vocation. The more compassion we have inside for how imperfect we are, for the more compassion we have for others. And I found that the more I know myself, the more like, oh, I do that too. Oh, the more compassion I can have for the other. And the more I find that I need to rely on God. I'm so imperfect, but God will make us perfect in our imperfection, as St. Paul is saying. Going back to the IFS model, the states of consciousness, I imagine them. I'm a scientist, so I see brain. This is a little brain in here. I don't know if you see it with lots of wires and whatnot. I thought, oh, this is a cool picture. Lots of wires. I think of that like cluster of neurons. When, let's say, we get angry, they just fire up and they hijack our consciousness, so to speak. And we can see it, we can sense it, but we don't have access sometimes to something deeper. So but the same way if we have other positive emotions or positive experiences. But I think of them of clusters of functions, of feelings, beliefs, thoughts, body sensation, and they have original good intention. They can either have protective or natural function. For example, there's nothing wrong with the need to eat, to drink, to love, to connect, to affirm one's identity, to be valued, to be intimate, to protect oneself. I think we get into problem when they're out of balance. And it was very helpful to hear Father Maximus Consta. He's a monk who's from Mount Athos, and he's here on campus, and I heard him on several retreats. He talks about those natural functions as God. There's goodness in it, and I think that fits so much with our Orthodox theology. There's goodness in the way we're created. And that I think of them of God's seeds. And if I'm thinking that, and it's true in this particular model, they support that, which was interesting. That the parts have have a wisdom. Even the ones that we don't like, they have some sort of wisdom, but we can't get access to that. We don't have access to that because of our protective nature. But if I think of them as key to God in a certain sense, even the least favorite parts of us, the least of the brethren. But this beauty, I was just struck in there's so many in the Bible, in our Psalms, in our liturgy, for you have formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and my soul knows very well. That's just so beautiful that there is that goodness that I can rely on that comes from God. And if you're trained in humanistic psychology, you might know Maslow, pyramid of needs. So I think of needs that way. Now, Maslow, he missed something. In the 21st century, there's one deeper need that we all should have. Need for Wi-Fi. I think he missed that. But that idea that we have those needs that are so central, and we also have this, if you can think of our states of consciousness as well. There are many ways to think of this as a model, which are all limited in nature. So take them with a grain of salt. One would be the living room, so to speak, right? There's not, imagine a really amazing, important guest. Bishop John might come to our house to visit. And oh my goodness, I'm going to clean the house and the living room is going to be really beautiful, right? And I might ask not to come maybe in a bedroom or whatever. We keep the beautiful things in our state of consciousness sometimes, right? But underneath, and this follows with the with depth psychology, we have things in subconscious, we have these things in unconscious, and now research is showing that unconscious is actually different than what necessarily Freud described. But there are things that we don't always hold in our minds, so to speak. There's research also on memory. They have different types of memories, and we hold something to the forefront, and some things are really deep, and we keep them there. So in this, another example to think is a computer, right, and the programs. Programs, we love them, we need them, but sometimes they get stuck, right? And I'm still trying to remember what's that escape, force quit. I still haven't memorized the force quit sequence, which buttons I have to put on a program gets stuck. And sometimes I have to unplug our computer. So think about the parts like that, the states of consciousness. If they work beautifully and fluidly, it's wonderful. But when they don't and they get stuck, we need a reboot. Another metaphor I have is in thinking of God, the essence, and us, we are his vessel. I mean, we're born with a reason. We have to, God gave us whatever parts we have to really fulfill his mission here, and his desire for us, and our purpose, whatever that is. And if God is the uncreated light and mysterious, that I understand that true self as that. So again, don't be misled by the term self as more, there's something at the core that's so much deeper than our parts are the vessels by which we bring his light into our being. And in the end, my students ask me, so is this a part? Is it still a part? Well, if it's fleshed out in the world, it's going to be a part. If you think about it, if you feel it, if you experience it, it's part. It's part of God's expression in the world. It's not God. There's a mystery, obviously, the co-creation, but there's something in there that is fleshed out. I love this quote. There's a crack in everything. There's how the light gets in. And I think experiencing suffering, we get those cracks a lot, and we see cracks in others. But to bring the message of hope, that there's a way to heal. Have you seen the Japanese bowls? So what they do when they're cracks, they actually put gold. So the bowl becomes even more precious. So that's what's happening with us. Through our suffering, as we heal, we still have the scars, but we can heal in a way that even is so much more beautiful and more precious. I wanted to share with you a little bit now about the different types of parts, because that will help us connect with how we can help ourselves as healers. From this point of view, they call it exiles. So those are instinctive, soft parts when we get hurt, when feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, shame, we feel bad for whatever reason. And those we usually try to think of the exiles, whatever parts we have that we want to banish out of our consciousness, so to speak, right? who wants to walk around and feeling sad all the time or feeling shamed all the time, right? We have different mechanism protectors that will help us with that. And sometimes exiles are subtle and also culturally. So I want us to bring also the cultural layer to this. In our culture, girls in general, when they're raised, they're not the parts of being, their anger and aggression, so to speak, is very much exiled. You have to be a good girl. You cannot do this. If a woman is more assertive, well, she's just really, I'm not going to say the words, but if a man is assertive, he's a great leader. So there's things in our culture that for women, for example, being assertive, it's not necessarily something that's encouraged. For men, I think it's not encouraged to be sensitive. Sometimes, just be tough. You have to be a man. You cannot cry. So the soft parts are exiled culturally. And obviously, we know much more, and we hope that in our families things are embraced with love and not, fall into the patterns of our culture. But things like that happen. And I would encourage you to think culturally, whatever country you're from, what kind of parts maybe even exile or not. Things that here are acceptable, or in other parts are acceptable. So things to remember, and I'll show you some pictures. Some of them are funny to kind of get a feel of the parts. So I have a quick succession just of images. But to remember that the original intent is good. There's some goodness in it. And I have to rely on that when I'm with my clients and they come and they're a part that looks really destructive. And I'm going to trust that Christ is in me and Christ is in the other person. And somehow I have to allow that mystery, mysterious healing to happen and to get to that good intention. And it happens. And what's their function? They could bring joy to the system, remove unpleasant feelings, or protects from hurts. And sometimes they get stuck in repetitive roles, and this is when we get addictions. And addiction, I'm not talking just about big addictions. I can talk about my chocolate addiction. I mean, we have all sorts of addictions that are coming up in that way. And through life experiences, parts get hurt, shamed, stuck in those repetitive addictive roles. It could be burdened with false beliefs that we kind of pick up when we're 5 or 10 and are still going into our mind and we aren't even aware of. And interestingly, the healing process, what I've experienced through our faith and through this model, and this model facilitates what I want. The reason I'm even bringing it is not so much to explain one or the other as much as to say this is a way of relating that is different than what I've experienced in my training as a psychiatrist and seeing so many models that actually is effective, has a lot of dignity, has a lot of respect for the other, and has trust in God. And we can use God while we're doing this work. And in my experience with clients, the presence of God is every time there. If we just allow it to happen, we just give the space and invite him to happen. And the healing, it's a little slower. It's like a slowing down through whatever mixture of reactions there are, but it's a connection of God, the true self, with each part. And that produces, and there's as I said, a very respectful and beautiful way to get parts that are extremely reactive. I've seen from addictive parts, really extreme, cutting, pulling hair, overeating, sexual addiction. Those are protectors. They just get stuck. To all of a sudden be able to go to the deeper need and connect with God, and all of a sudden relax, because they protect something. And if we can heal whatever they're protecting, then all of a sudden the system, there's freedom and space inside. So if God is really, we're self-emptying, a kenosis process, kenosis, right? He's coming to our level. I find it true also in this work, in the parts. There's that compassion. There's no push, no pull. He's really coming down to each part's level in a way to help it heal. So I'm going to show you the different parts. I'm going to go through the exiles and the protectors and show you a little bit the transformation, and then wrap it up so we can bring it to what does that mean for us as healers and how can we use that. And it helps me, not just for me, actually, healing myself, but this framework helps to understand the other so I don't get triggered. So see, if someone is in my face screaming, I see there's a hurt behind. And I'm going to approach that person totally different. And I said that in my class, and a student came so excited next class and said, I tried it, it worked. She went and the boss was screaming at her and pointing fingers and said, my go-to reaction was to get frozen and to feel like running away. And all of a sudden I remember there must be a hurt behind this person's. And she said, I looked into his eyes and I saw the hurt. And I said, oh, this must be so hard for you. And the person, yes, and started talking. And all of a sudden it was a total different conversation. So let me tell you about the parts. So this is not, by the way, all those parts are not, in many models I found, there is always a pattern. If this happens, that happens, and this causes this, and this reaction causes that reaction. What I discovered is there is an infinite way of interconnectedness with the parts. I mean, the parts are universal, we're all humans, but the way they're connected is so different. And that's a good thing because it can keep us really curious. You never really know what's behind it. You can assume, but I've learned never to assume and just to ask. And I found it's so much better way of listening by being curious because we really don't know. But I want to share with you the different parts. So, for example, saddened part, fearful part, love me part. And that's not necessarily exile, but it's a really deep touch vulnerable. I'm vulnerable. I need love and connection. And I think especially with our teenagers and young people, that's just not there. It's exile. They have to be tough and kind of cool and do the swag and lonely exile parts, shame part, worthless part. This it says, I'm sick of feeling worthless all the time. And the list goes on and on. This is just a snapshot. Now, there are two types of protectors, which is so cool to really get that. Protective parts, they're the manager. I think of them the law or our beliefs, our guideposts in a way. They're good. All of those, the titles are a little, again, misleading. When I hear a manager, I'm not really inspired. But actually, our core beliefs, in a sense, are this kind of, they help us to stay out of trouble. They help us to stay with Christ. I mean, those are very helpful. The idea is that they are preemptive, right? They have core values, core beliefs, and I would say this is also what we see at the forefront, usually in our day-to-day self, right? In our interaction here, we're seeing our protectors that are, help us to function on a daily basis. And those could be positive or negative, and not just positive or negative. Maybe that's mistype there. They could be flexible or inflexible. And sometimes it can be helpful and sometimes can get us stuck. So self-sacrifice for the other, being tough, persevering in face of adversities, keep going, right? All those are wonderful qualities. Helping others, perfectionism, self-critical, but it helps us to be better, right? But if it's too much, it can get us into trouble. And this is where we can put ourselves down and have troubles. So the original intent is preemptive in nature. But remember, behind any of those reactions, most likely there is an exile, there is a hurt, right? Even if it's not a strong hurt or not necessarily hurt, there is something that they're trying to protect us from, to say it better. And it become very inflexible, they can bring stress into the system. And I really was thinking of Jesus, is he flexible or inflexible? And yes, he said he came to fulfill the law, but in any interaction, there was a flexibility to him. He didn't apply this like really rigidly. When the disciples were eating the grain in the field, he said, no, they need that. Healing on Sabbath, With the adulterous woman, he told the man, if you are really pure and blameless, you throw the stone first. There's something in him that wasn't like, yeah, this person did wrong. Let's punish him. So, and the church, I think, embodies that. There's a strictness and the flexibility, this concept of economia. You have to use our judgment. When we say that, we have to use Christ to really help us discern. Now, let me give you some example of managers. I'm saving the world. And I think as healers, right, we rely on this. We want to save. We want to really help others. We want to make a difference. But remember, sometimes it can be something else. And I'm showing here a picture of fear. Sometimes we do it out of fear, not necessarily, but it could be sadness. So add to this exile here whatever part you want. But the point of this to remember, there's a story behind the story, talking about Father Deacon Stephen yesterday. I can do it, a tough part. We need that, trust me. But what happens when inside we feel worthless, right? And then we just have the armor. And I think that's what happens sometimes. We go on an automated pilot and we show this forefront when inside we're hurting. We could have a striver part, keep going. And that's really helping us, right? We got to finish the race for Christ. And in the same time, if it's motivated by fear or worthlessness or sadness, we can become really exhausted, and that's not really helpful. Other protective parts. We need discerning, right? Judging in a way of discerning. But if it's too intense and if it's out of shame or out of sadness, right, it can become like this. Or we need a motivator, kind of positive coach. But if it's driven out of sadness or shame, it can become this. Right? Really like, hey, you really intense, negative motivator, self-critical. The pleasing, helping part. When my kids are in this part, I love them so much. They just want to help and do. And it's true. Isn't that the world better when we are in a wonderful, pleasing part? We want to please the other. We want to really help. But what is the motivation behind? If it's done out of fear or out of another, sadness or loneliness, it can make us really burdened. And that's what I think happens too many times to us. Protective parts, those are the sweet life-saving distractors. They take us out. Those are the third type of parts, the protective. They call it firefighter because they jump. They're so loyal to us. They come in when I'm tired at the end of the day and I eat a chocolate. That firefighter part brings really quickly soothing, right? So they're very loyal to us. I mean, I have to give credit to that part. We become more friends, I would say, in the last 5 years. But they're quick in nature. So any reaction it's really quick and kind of hijacks, this is a bad term, but think of if it really takes on our consciousness, that's a firefighter reaction. It could be multitasking. Again, multitasking can be very helpful, but if I keep doing it just because I'm anxious, and I actually had that part, many of those parts that I describe I have a multi-part task, and it helped me because I'm really anxious. But when I do like 20 things in the same time, okay, I'm progressing. Anger, right? It's an important reaction, but remember, why is this coming? And is this coming appropriately? Can we have a conversation with us, or does it hijack us? Overeating part. Eating, it's wonderful if we do it with Christ. But when it's too much and it comes out of sadness or shame and whatnot, it's a firefighter. Tired, sleepy, procrastinating part, could happen as well. Again, we all need sometimes to wait for things. We need to go to sleep. But when it comes too quickly and all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm not doing this tomorrow, we know that it's a firefighter. Could be fight or flight. And again, why is this Is it doing because of fear? Is this legitimate fear that I really have to run or fight? Or is this something that is just an old reaction? It could be all other things, right? With potential for addiction, from drinking to eating to gambling to, but what's driving this? What's behind the story? Money, shopping excessively, computers, internet, rebellious. Again, all of those, they don't necessarily are bad in themselves if they're, whatever the situation is, overly sexual or drugs, all those are excesses. And the point's to remember that reactions have good intention. And I have this quote, and looking at the time, I'm not going to read it, but it has to do with a great banquet. And this is coming back to what Father Anthony was saying. Great banquet, if we think of just externally inviting people and inviting the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, but how about internally? Can we invite in our inner self at our banquet where Christ is, our parts that we don't like, to really, not to indulge them, but to really bring compassion and transform them? And I love this quote from St. John of Costa. Love every man in spite of his falling into sin. Never mind the sins, but remember that the foundation of the man is the same, the image of God. And St. Porphyrius, who was canonized a few years ago, if you read the book, Wounded by Love, yeah, it's just wonderful. It's just full of love, full of love. Do not choose negative methods to correct yourselves. There is no need to fear the devil, hell, or anything else. The things provoke a negative reaction. And then we have two problems. The object is to live, to study, to pray, and to advance in love. And it's true, that's what happened. When we have a problem, if we react in a negative way, now we have two problems. So what's the impact on Christ in these different parts? I'll just show you again quickly some images to see the potential transformation. So an overburdened practitioner, right? An overburdened chaplain, doctor, priest, social worker, nurse. Define it might be really a part that's striving. I have to finish. And again, we all have deadlines and we have to finish. But if it comes out of need, I have to save the world, and it feels it's a burden that maybe we have when we are really young, taking care of people and at the young age. Before we know it, if we can connect and every part connect to the true self, then the parts will transform. And that kind of transformation, I see it every day in my practice. I see it with people, and it's beautiful. A very angry manager can be really helpful, and someone that's very self-critical actually can be very helpful. It helps us to keep track, organize the list and whatnot, but not in an excessive way. A fearful person, a fearful part can transform and be really watching for us. Those fearful parts, they're onto something. They maybe perceive danger, and maybe 99 of the time is no danger. But when it is, I need to listen to that. And I will go back now to the cycle of caring. So remember the 4 steps. The first one, the empathic attachment, active involvement. This is when we connect with the others. And the third phase of separation phase and recreation phase, this is what I want, in terms of IFS, I want to translate that those are there's the inflexible managers that will push us into not regenerating, and because of it, we go to distractions, which are the firefighters, and before we know it, we're bleeding. We're not taking care of ourselves because we're not in touch with God. And I want to make a point for the 3rd and 4th phase, and then we're going to do in a second workshop some exercises in here about that. But the separation phase is that time that we need to remove ourselves to heal our wounds and take care of our needs. And I would argue we don't need to do that just on weekends or in vacation. After each person, we can separate. When I'm walking to greet my client, I can have 10 seconds. I can separate internally and turn inward and really find out about myself. How am I doing? Is anyone bleeding in there? Can we talk about this later? Can we wait? And really connect with God in those 10 seconds. Sometimes we have more when we walk to the cafeteria, to whatever place we're going. And I'm reminded Jesus did that. Several times in his time on earth, several moments, he removed himself. It was kind of interesting to read, early on when I was young. Why would if he wants to feed the poor and help the hungry and heal all that, why would he remove himself? He always removed himself, and he find time to be quiet. And I have some quotes here from Luke and some quotes for John when he went aside. Now, the recreation phase is going in, and that's the last phase, and this is the importance of attentiveness. What we heard this week as well about going in and being quiet internally. There's a quote here from St. Theophan de Lucas. You must descend from your head to your heart. The present, your thoughts are in your head. God himself, as it were, is outside of you. So your prayers and other spiritual exercises remain exterior. So he's making a plea for going inside. So going inside as a healer, I would say there are several ways to think about it. First of all, healing our old exiles, our old hurts. Have we healed them? Or do we just push them out of consciousness? And the metaphor is like this, very similar to, have you ever tried to push a beach ball under the water? It works for a while, it requires a lot of effort, and when you least expect it, that beach ball is going to come up. So that's what happens with exiles or things that we don't like. We push them out of our consciousness, and we're fine for a while, and before you know it, something triggers, and then we're in front with someone else, and they bring a hurt, and we're triggered, and the beach ball is up, and then we cannot really focus. And then we are in a protective reaction, and we cannot really listen and have compassion for the other because there's too much happening. We feel threatened for whatever reason. So I would make a plea for that would all take care of ourselves by healing our old hurts. Inner attentiveness, contemplation, stillness. And we're going to exercise this a second workshop, how to think of places and times that you are really in touch with God and you really feel joyful. When you feel in the flow, music, sports, looking at icons, chanting, being in church. And we'll have a plan to translate that so you can use it in your day-to-day, so you can quickly regenerate in your daily practice. And this will allow his love and grace and peace and compassion in our inner system. And then the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And for me, this is the image that I have. God is the vine, and we are the grapes, and we are really connected, and we are the branches. And if we can connect to God and stay connected by fulfilling those 4 steps of the cycle. So here are the cycles again: the empathic attachment, the active involvement, whatever you're doing, and separation phase, and then the renewal when we go inward and we really take care of ourselves and connect with God. And of course, too much caring for the other, right, can lead to burnout. And I wanted to bring this up because this is an interesting concept I stumble upon, which I think you're familiar to. Sometimes we use caring for others as means to avoid going inward. And that's, in a sense, is codependency. So to realize when is caring for others is too much, and when are we out of balance. Too much caring for self obviously is too much. We can get into egotism, self-absorption. We can abuse, neglect the other. And this is also, all those imbalances are at times reinforced by our society. But the best place is to be in balance. And I'm reminded of this quote from St. Seraphim of Sarov: "Acquired a spirit of peace, and 1,000 around you will be saved." And that's our task in healing. And this is a painting of my youngest daughter that I miss, and it's lovely to see her painting here. And in part 2, we will we'll do some exercises for separation phase and renewal phase that will hopefully be of help to you. So I think we're open to questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Engaging talk. One of the major points that I would take from your presentation is the capacity to engage in a caring, empathic way with others is dependent on your competence and capacity to disengage. That is, if you can completely disconnect and successfully so, that will enhance your capacity to better connect with individuals when you come back to doing that work. One means of doing that that I just wanted to mention was transcendental meditation, which is an Eastern tradition, which I've tried but haven't been very successful at. But some people have been very successful at disengaging from the tumult of the day through meditation. But there are many other ways, as you have suggested.
And I'm glad you brought that. I was very unsuccessful as well with that. But I think that disengagement is just a phase. It's a passage. It's a passage to go inward to God and to Christ. So it's not the end of it. It's just the means to really get to God and allow for healing and for restoring internally so we can be better. I really like the example Dr. Rossi had in the first talk. He said, patients don't come to me to see me depressed, right? If I'm depressed, if I'm hurting, I cannot be really of help. So the goal of that disconnect is it's a passage to go inward and to really heal. Because if all my parts are in peace, if I can convince all my parts to be in peace and their needs are met, I can really be focused and give everything to the other. But there's a dance.
Is part of the problem that this looks to the world as if you're disengaging, or I don't know, the pressure is going to be to continue to be the Superman or the Superwoman, and if you look like you're disengaged, I don't know. There's this sense that there's a pressure. You want to look busy all the time,
right?
Because
there's a lot of pressure.
If you look like you're not busy, somebody will either make you more busy or accuse you of it's. And part of that is I don't know. I'm a people pleaser, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Totally agree. And I think there's so much pressure in our culture to be busy. I mean, if we ask everyone, how are you doing? Oh, I'm busy. Yeah. But it's a good way. It's a good thing, right? And I'm busy. But I think our church fathers were really wise when they also point us to more contemplative stance and really a way of prayer, our liturgical cycle, just being in church. There are certain elements that are built in that I think can give us permission to disengage. And the world doesn't have to know, right? It doesn't matter. Right? If for Christ, we might get judged. Like Christ said, if they judge me, trust me, they'll judge you too. So.
I thank you for your presentation, specifically the idea of affirming the good intention behind it. It's one of the struggles as a caregiver, and when I work with students, sometimes they ask me, Father Adrian, are you telling me to be the devil's advocate? And now, using your presentation, I can say you can be Christ's advocate. A very classic example, somebody's over drinking, and I would encourage the student to say, tell me a little bit of what drinking is helping you with. What is drinking doing well for you? And from the outside, it might seem like, are you telling me you want me to encourage their behavior over drinking? I'm saying no. I hope that you can find a way of arriving at what's behind it and what it does positive for them, as there's a good intention even before they start over drinking.
Exactly.
And it's very difficult.
Right. It's very difficult and it's very puzzling when I present that. They're like, what do you mean to my clients? But yeah, so true. Thank you.
I actually was just wanting you to follow up with that. Is there a way that you tend to present that to your clients? I'm a therapist, so it would be really helpful to kind of get a...
That's a great question. So I can give you some examples. So, for example, if someone is cutting, and I had that, so this is extreme behavior, they're really more difficult to really engage that way. So first, there's a way to help other reactions to relax. You know what I mean? Because if there's a part saying, oh, this is really terrible, I have to really help that, befriend that. But then I start thinking, I give ideas. When they don't find any, I could say, well, maybe it's trying to release stress. Maybe it's trying to help you when you're overwhelmed. I don't know. Is it giving you joy? What is it? And they'll say, oh, yeah, when I'm really stressed, this kind of takes me out. So here you go. That the intent is to deal with a very overwhelming situation. So I say, listen, how about, and obviously there's steps. There's an intense training for that, which I highly recommend. It's not just intellectual, it's experiential, and it's transformative. But there's a way to negotiate, especially with firefighters. Okay, well, if there's a way, I don't know, but if there is a way that you and I can help with that overwhelming feeling, would that be okay? Maybe for this part of you that wants to maybe wait, kind of see what's happening. We're not trying to dismantle the job, because part can get very reactive and they'll come stronger. or suicidal part. That's a really difficult one. But anytime when I ask, well, it seems to me that you're just trying to, I'm sorry? Have control of that, and sometimes it's the pain is unbearable. The pain is unbearable, and I want out. And when I get that, I say, yeah, of course you want out. I mean, who wants to be without unbearable pain? And again, if there's a way that I can help you with that unbearable pain, would this be okay to just wait? I'm not saying it, I don't know if it's possible or not. We'll try. Give that kind of hope. And again, stay curious. And when I give different suggestions, I don't say, oh, this is it. I just offer, I make an invitation. What do you think? Because I trust Christ in them. I trust, you have to trust that there's something else at work there. And they're like, yeah, it's not about killing myself. I don't want the pain. And then we work with the pain, so we're there. The same with sexual addiction, with alcohol, drugs, and eating. There's always something that is helping. We're trying to help with an extreme state.